The girl was horrified to find that her legs had turned to plastic, but she couldn't care less. She kept crawling forward. Strangely, the girl's hands gradually left her body. It turns out that all this was just a dream she had before she died, and this dream is the girl's current predicament, because she was made into a real Barbie doll by the pervert in front of her. Not only that, her arms were injected with anesthetic drugs. It's no exaggeration to say that the girl has almost lost control of her body except for her eyes. Then the fat girl began to introduce the girl to her other two sisters. Their situation was similar to the girl's. Then the fat girl brought a teapot. She pretended to pour water into the cup. The last thing to do was to place the cup in front of each doll. In the eyes of the perverts, it's just a game, but in the eyes of the dolls, there was fear. After the fat girl left, one of the dolls suddenly pulled the needle out of her hand. She got up and started running for her life, but it wasn't long before the doll slipped and fell to the ground. At this point, the girl still did not give up hope of survival. Suddenly she turned her head and saw that her legs had turned into plastic. Even so, the girl is still trying to crawl forward. At that moment, the girl's arms began to detach from her body. This dream also meant that the doll's life had come to an end. When they die, the fat girl won't have anything left to live for. The dead dolls were dumped in the park by the fat girl. By the time the police arrived, it was 2 days later. When the officers approached the body, they were puzzled. On the surface, the doll had no marks and was well made up. The police concluded that the victim hadn't been assaulted before her death. This also indicates that the murderer is most likely a woman. As the investigation progressed, the police made a new discovery. The doll's hair was sewn on later. That means the murderer cared about the doll's appearance. With these clues, the police were almost certain that the murderer was a woman who loved dolls. The result is not far from the detective's guess. According to the forensic examination, the victim was not assaulted during her lifetime, but a large amount of drugs were detected in the doll's body. A drug that blocks the brain's control over the body. A drug that's controlled by the local authorities. That's why the forensic pathologist deduced that the murderer should be a paramedic. As the investigation progresses, more and more dolls are appearing in various corners of the city. According to the police investigation, these victims are unrelated and have been transformed into dolls, and the cause of their deaths all pointed to the illegal drugs that the coroner said. So the police concluded that the murderer was the same person. The only doubt is that the dolls are wearing clothes that don't belong to them. In order to get to the bottom of it, the agents launched an investigation. Finally, they found out something from the owner of the tailor shop. According to the owner, the victims' clothes were made of high-quality materials and were tailor-made. Also, the bodies and weights of the victims were very similar. After hearing this, the agents seemed to realize something. Judging from the corpses that keep appearing, the police are sure that the murderer will continue to commit crimes, because the killer hasn't found the perfect rhythm yet. In the end, the police completed a profile of the murderer based on the parks where the victims appeared. After analyzing the case, the police came to a conclusion. The murderer must be a woman with a childhood trauma. She's a doctor or nurse by profession. She was an introvert and a loner. As for the reason why she made a doll out of a living person, it's easy to explain. The police believe that the doll must have stimulated the killer's childhood in some way. That's why the murderer's perverted killing method. So the chief ordered the police to look out for women who seem to be out of sorts. But before the police could investigate, the fat girl had already taken out her next victim. The kind woman was surprised to find a fat girl in need of help, so she wanted to go up to give each other a hand. Unbeknownst to her, this became the beginning of the girl's nightmare. As soon as the two of them moved the wheelchair to the car, the fat girl's eyes instantly turned vicious. Then she took out a stun gun and stunned the girl. When the girl woke up again, she had already been made into a real-life version of a baby. Not only that, the girl's arm was injected with anesthetic drugs. It's no exaggeration to say that she basically lost control of her body except for her eyes. The girl was accompanied by two other women with the same experience. Maybe to the fat girl, this is just a game, but in the eyes of the dolls are full of fear. Afterwards, the fat girl casually explains a few words, and then go to work. The girl knew she had a chance. She was diabetic. No matter what drug she was injected with, it decomposed much faster than ordinary people. So the fat girl's dosage was not enough to paralyze the girl. After several attempts, the girl finally pulled out the syringe. Seeing this, her seatmate immediately cast a glance of help. The girl first moved out of her seat with difficulty. Then, at her companion's request, she found a phone. The girl finally saw hope. She crawled to the corner of the table to call the police, but the phone fell on the floor by mistake. She was about to reach for it when she accidentally smashed the model next to her. But the girl didn't care about that. She picked up her mobile phone and dialed the police number. Just when everyone thought she was going to be saved, an accident happened. It turns out that the phone is just a toy. The girl had no choice but to turn back. With her last conscious thought, she removed a syringe from one of her companions. After that, the girl couldn't bear it any longer and fainted. On the other hand, the fat girl just got off the bus and realized something was wrong. I don't know when there were so many policemen in my neighborhood. Panicked, the fat girl started to rush to her home. When she heard the sound of the door opening, her companion tried to wake up the unconscious girl with her feet. Fortunately, the smell of her feet was strong enough. Finally woke up the girl before the fat girl came back. Soon the fat girl also opened the door. In order not to let the other side find out, the girl had to put the syringe back in place. When the fat girl returned to the room, the girl also sat back in her original position. On the surface, there was nothing to see, but she still underestimated her opponent's insight. Seeing the fake arm and the toy phone on the floor, the fat girl immediately realized what was going on. She took out a pair of scissors from the drawer and slowly approached the dolls on the table. After looking around, she went straight to the girl.
Don't leave me. Let us go. I can't.
Suddenly, a police officer appeared, and the whole thing took a new turn. She's not a Barbie doll, she's a real person, and the dolls are made by this pervert. The fat girl uses anesthetic to make the dolls lose control of their bodies. The victims can only sit and be slaughtered. When the dolls die, they are dumped in the park by the fat girl. The police immediately set up a task force to investigate the incident. According to the information of the victims, agents quickly found the victims' relatives. The family confirmed that the clothes the victim was wearing when she was found did not belong to them. The police deduced that the murderer must have tailored these clothes for the victims in order to transform them into living dolls. Afterwards, the detective visited many tailor shops with these clothes. Finally, a senior lady saw something unusual about the clothes. She described herself as a seamstress for nearly 30 years, but the clothes brought in by the police were made in a very special way. The old lady clearly remembers that this kind of sewing was only done in factories that made dolls in the 80s. Through investigation, there are only 3 factories like this on the market. Then the police began to visit the factories one by one. Finally, they found this long-lost sewing method in an old man's house. Then the owner dug through a box and found a pamphlet on dolls from the 80s. The style of the dolls on the brochure was almost identical to the clothes of the victims. Not only that, the police also found a prize contest held by the manufacturer at the back of the brochure. According to the owner's recollection, one of the buyers was really special. The buyer wrote a letter to the factory. In the letter, the buyer was suspected of having been molested by her father, so the boss took the letter to the police. But due to a lack of evidence, the case was never solved. After getting the clue, the detective immediately went back to the police station to look for the letter. After investigation, the identity of the fat girl finally emerged. The police can't believe that she was only 10 years old when the letter was written. What's even more scary is the fat girl's father. When he found his daughter's letter, he started to treat her with electric shock therapy. You know, electric shock therapy is only used on the mentally ill. As the investigation deepened, the whole story came to light. It was mentioned in the file that Fatty's father was the director of the mental hospital, and her daughter, Fatty, was a nurse there. That's why she was able to get illegal drugs so easily, since she was only 10 years old at the time. In addition to the long-term electric shock eventually led to her IQ is only 10 years old. So in the fat girl's mind, she didn't know what crime was. That explains why she made dolls out of living people. Once they found out the truth, they came to the girl's house. At first, she was hostile to the officers, but after some reassurance, she gradually opened up. According to her, she was humiliated by her father when she was 10 years old. After each humiliation, her father would give her a doll, but she was too young to understand, so she wrote to the factory. The father was furious. From then on, he claimed that his daughter was mentally ill and needed electric shock treatment. Until one day, she found out that her father had gone to another girl and given away her favorite doll. Eventually, the fat girl had a nervous breakdown. That's what gave her the idea of making living dolls. She didn't know how to commit a crime. Luckily, the agent was prepared for this. He brought all her favorite dolls here. When she saw them, she forgot everything. The police also took the opportunity to call for backup. All the victims in the house were finally rescued. The fat girl was finally taken away from the scene. As the culprit of the whole incident, her father will also be punished by justice.